Hey guys, Ryan here, RDM, and we're doing another V-twin update. And yeah, we're gonna be talking about these V-twins. We're starting to get the discussion going, people having questions, and it's reminded me a lot of when the Piaggio was developed. There's the Piaggio head. You know, I gotta educate people, but I'm ready to just respond. I don't have any script here. It's gonna be a little bit all over the place because it's the way I am, and in a way sometimes, and it's also very late at night. But anyways, we'll have a little update video. Oh, you know what? I do need this up after all. So yeah, we'll take a look at what we got going on here. So you see these spacer plates. They will bolt to the underside here. And there'll be these little half round things. They'll glue inside here. So it'll keep the chambers separate here and keep it from leaking to the outside here. Alright, so I could remove these. Yeah, the more I break it down, the more we can see things. I don't think we need this anymore. We get there's going to be a flywheel. And even the crank, I can start deconstructing the crank. So I mean, this isn't finished, but you get the idea with this piece. And the rods one by one. I guess we could talk about the rods. I was gonna go with steel, but I'm gonna actually go with 70-75. I'm gonna pretty much keep them a 2D shape like this. I'm gonna refine it a little bit. And it's gonna have a needle roller bearing here that has its own outer race. And so far the pin, it looks like it's gonna be a step diameter. There's reasons for that. And the pin is going to be integrated with this side. It's going to be a two-piece crank essentially instead of a three-piece. Normally this pin would be its own member, and that's what would make it a three-piece crank. Not including the rod, of course. And there's a huge amount of hours in just the crank alone, but very happy with how that's coming out. So yeah, we can remove the crank. But anyways, okay, so let's look. Imagine these sprockets are driven by the crank. Now you notice that these things are offset and there's 3 sprockets. That's because the rods are next to each other. And we're gonna run the belt up here, and we're gonna have a sprocket right next to here. So this is going to be up in the case. I can put one of these back so you can see. We're going to have a bearing support that holds here and here, and have a pin and have the bearing within this piece. And there'll be just a 1-to-1 drive chain here. And essentially we're going to make this piece here, I think it's running in its original condition with the original belt. We don't want to have to source our own these belts. We want to just be able to use the original belt. And by doing this too, it'll give us the ability to adjust the timing. and that might be a way to tune it for more performance. So that's cool. Otherwise, there's no way to change the timing. And there's multiple ways that could be done. That'll be another video. So I think, yeah, I hope you guys are understanding how this timing works. Now, to keep costs as low as possible, this piece and this piece will be identical, and these sprockets will be identical, these two here. Alright, so that's the timing. That's how the cam will be driven. Really cool overhead cam system. And it has a compression release. I know I showed you guys, but it's pretty interesting. Both the intake and exhaust run off the same cam lobe. Okay, moving on. So let's get into the transmission. Then you have this heavier sprocket here. This one here. Notice it has a fair amount of teeth. Basically, if you go over 14 teeth for the small sprocket, you could send a lot more power through the chain. The chain's gonna last a lot longer. When you go really small, like 10, 9, 8 tooth, even 11 and 12, it's just not really good. The amount of power that you can safely transmit goes down, the chain life goes down. So we're gonna have a happy chain. The chain's gonna be in an oil bath. And then that goes directly to this guy here. On the underside, we'll have a little chain tensioner. But I can calculate here basically I can play around with the amount of links. I just got to keep the links an even number because we do not want any half links. And basically I make sure that all the chain center to center distances are going to work out. Alright, moving on. So yeah, this brings it to a 2.4 ratio right off the bat. Normally we're more than 4, like a 4.1 to 1 is what these the original gear set runs at. So through this sprocket is the primary drive, this pink guy here. And it looks pretty complicated. We'll break it down. It's actually really simple. And the whole design is to be simple. So here's the primary drive gear. And then in here, there'll be just a bunch of 1/4 inch long, 1/8 inch diameter pins. 8 of them. And that'll interface this outer drive shell with the sprocket. There won't be any bolts, just pins. And the pins will be contained on this side because the hole won't be longer than it needs to be. And on this side by a retaining clip. The retaining clip will also hold the shell in place. And the shell held by the retaining clip will hold the bearing in place along with the shoulder. And then this will be the whole engine case here holding this bearing, which will have a ledge on this side holding the bearing on this side held by the clip, and then pressed in will be a lip seal. I'm going to isolate the bearings from the oil bath because we don't have an oil filter system. Also, I want to make it so that we can play around with the oil levels, and perhaps in the chain bath we actually have it pretty much flooded and we have a good amount of oil in there. We'll get to that later with the oiling. And essentially, the bearings won't love a full oil bath, but the chains might not mind it as much. At least for short durations, then it churns it up into mist and starts distributing it across the engine. But anyways, moving on, the drive shell will replicate this gear. And see, there's teeth in it. I didn't model it up, but instead of the gear, there'll just be a plate that holds the pads that is driven by this. And the shell will be able to support the plate so we can actually delete the central bearing that's normally featured on the China clutch, but otherwise we can use the stock or RDM clutch plate and flower nut and the China flywheel. Keep the price down. Then this central shaft goes through the middle of it all, and for the most part it's a straight shaft. It looks complicated, but there's a keyway that goes through the whole thing, and it's 180 degrees apart. In order to make it so people could repair this at home, and there's no expensive or specialty tools to manufacture replacement parts. There's just cross holes drilled 180 degrees apart in this sprocket. And these curious little pieces, they're really just imagine a T-shaped piece, and there's flat cuts in them. You know, rectangles on this side and then just pins on this side, but all one piece of metal. And this acts as our keyway. It's late, I'm not going to get into the whole background of these guys. But it is a common machine element design. And in this case, and normally when it is used, it's to keep costs down. So cutting splines and things, it costs more money for the setup. In the long run, you can get more strength out of a piece of material. So you can get a lighter piece, you can use less material. And when the material costs are a significant piece, when you're making millions of something, you know, it's worth going with splines over a dual keyway like this. But I like the dual keyway because somebody with a mini mill at home or a Bridgeport, they can replicate this shaft. They can replicate this gear even. And that's quite intentional. Then here will be a Belleville spring washer stack. And that'll pull in the flower nut to actuate the clutch. I didn't model any yet, but there will be a release mechanism. So anyways, you guys can see with this thing pushed in, and imagine pads spinning around in here because this drive shell is spinning them. We essentially have our familiar clutch, and here would be our familiar output sprockets. Instead of one, there's two of them. Then we go down here. Let me that's not what I meant to bring up. There it is. So now you see the two sprockets going over here. Okay, now we can take a closer look at this. So here is the shaft that is fed by these two sprockets. Try to zoom in better. Oh, this is tough because I'm looking at the phone. It's disorienting me. Alright, try not to get overwhelmed, but over here is just a 5/8 output shaft, and this is just a plain sprocket that you can get from anywhere with a keyway and two set screws. We have a heavy duty bearing here, and then the seal on this side. On this side of the shaft, same thing on the outside, and on the inside, we'll get to that whole plunger, but that's this thing here is what we'll have the shift fork in to shift gears. This here will have a blind hole, and we'll put a spring in it and a ball, and you'll see we have these grooves. That's what will make it so when you're shifting, it wants to either go in neutral or either gear. And of course we'll have an O-ring to keep oil from exiting the engine case. Just like our clutches in the China engine, there'll be a slot in the shaft and a cross pin. And there'll be this outer ring here. There will be 6 slots, 6 keyways, and 4 of them, you see 2 per side, will have those T-pin curious little things again. So basically, normally there would be splines here. We don't have any of that. This whole shift mechanism could be made on a very basic benchtop milling machine and benchtop lathe. Again, that's very intentional. Same thing with these sprockets. They're really not that complicated. And of course, they each have a bearing under them so they can idle. And these pins will just be a quite strong press fit in. 6 of these. And the slots are slightly elongated so you have a little bit of time to shift into gear. Your shift will be sped up, and these little ball detents will help give you some control. This is actually a little simpler than I thought. This is of course there'll be a tapped hole in this side of the shaft and a keyway. The case comes last. Okay, that's explaining what this is. That actually was not the point of this video. The point of this video was to explain, I suppose, I guess what the point of this is. Well, what we're trying to do we'll have a little flywheel on this side, but we're gonna have the primary chain right about here on this. We're just gonna have a much tighter package, and this is a small engine. This is a 79cc. This is not the 212. Now you imagine it still needs all that. So this doesn't belong in a bicycle, I don't think, but this is the, look at that. There's the bicycle mount on it, sure enough. I don't know why I have that on there. So I want to do the 4-strokes justice. We're gonna make a 4-stroke purpose-built bicycle engine, not just a commercial 4-stroke engine and then somehow make it fit on a bicycle. We're gonna do it the right way from the start. I love that people don't really get it, and they're just like, why don't you do this? Why don't you do this? I put a lot of thought into this, into every little aspect of it. Of this V-twin engine, this is the 4th time I've redrawn the entire engine. I have all these files. And this frame, it looks like it's super tight in here. But that's that red bike. And that's a small bike. So everything else, especially a fake felt, is going to fit. You can see there's the primary driving clutch. The secondary drive will be smaller, so you can kind of straddle the frame there. Look at it from top down. I like how you have a lot of adjustability here. Now there will be some basic shift linkage here. You see this T-shaped thing goes in and out. About 0.15 in each direction. And I want to use one of these sport bike twist throttles. You see they have a pull in each direction. So it'll give you a nice positive twist. You know, you twist all the way one way, shifts in first, twist all the way the other way, you're in second, and then you get in the middle, you're in neutral. And that, you know, these ball detents, these will make it so you have a positive engagement even in neutral. So yeah, I like that. The controls for this will be on this side, and the clutch, not a ton of real estate, but I'll figure it out. And the plan is to, I don't know if we're gonna get into the plan tonight. It is late. I might have to start wrapping this video up. But anyways, I might not make another update video for a few days. Who knows? I have to make these hubs for the Carnegie Mellon race car team again. A lot to clean up. I need to fix these for a machine. That's no good. Keep them busy. Some of the jobs over there. And I gotta quote a bunch of stuff. I've been quoting a lot. But I've been quoting, I guess, high enough I'm not getting everything, which is good. Anyways. So I guess we already talked about the width. It's not as wide as a 212. Or even a 79cc or anything really in the 4-stroke category. I do believe this will be the narrowest 4-stroke option. I've explained a lot on Facebook that basically the Piaggios are great, but they wear out. Like, let's say the motor doesn't break at all, which they don't. They're very reliable engines. You're gonna have cracks in the exhaust, and I mean, like, I know from experience, this is a really well-built bike in exhaust, and it just, I mean, this joint's been done 4 or 5 times. Up here's needed a bunch of work. It had spider cracks. Yeah, this tail end's been it's been a mess as far as the exhaust goes. Quite a few cracks through this back part of the frame, even with the tube through it. And a weird crack on the back over there, but that was fixed. So it's been harsh. I mean, the brakes also are larger, and still it's hard on the brakes. So the point is, going down on power, it's still a lot of power. Like, this is still too much power. We're still gonna call this race only, off-road only. But it's a lot more practical. I love that it's gonna be 2 speeds. I love lower RPM cruising without having to go slow to get that lower RPM. But I also want that off-road high torque gear and that, you know, great accelerating gear that you would use for racing. If I were to race this engine, I would just keep it in first gear and that's it. Just lock it out. And that would keep it within the rules. If they don't want 2 speeds, fine. Put it into first and leave it there. It'll be loud going down the straights, but good. You're racing. Also, it gets wider up here, but if you notice, there's quite a distance between here and up here. Hypothetically, you can trim this shaft as wide as you need it. You know, this is for a very wide tire. You could also flip this. Point is, you should still be able to fit your crank on this thing without having to go too short or too wide. That keeps it in the spirit of the bike. Also, it's a lot lighter. Yeah, it's not going to be a very heavy system. Oh, I guess we can talk about why is it going to be 2 speeds. Why don't I go 1 speed to keep it even cheaper? Or just make it a more practical launch of this thing? Good questions. Okay, let's start with talking about like some of the guiding reasons. There's always like a web of reasons all the time. So with the sprockets, we already talked about if you want to lay down good power, you want your chains to last a long time. Your small sprocket, you want to keep it at least 14, 15. So we are. I'd only have so much room for this primary larger sprocket. So we're only getting about 2.4 out of this primary drive, 2.4 reduction. Now remember, the China one is 4.1. This engine peaks around 7,000 and maxes out around 9,800. Let's say 10,000. So that's about 20% slower than we're used to. So, I mean, that kind of works. We're kind of within range 2.4 to 1, but ideally I would be at 3.5 to 1. Anyways, moving on. Well, I guess no, we're not moving on. If I were to go to like 3.5 to 1 or 4 to 1, the sprocket would become very large. It would become an ugly build. Everything would be spaced out more. So 2.4 to 1 it is. And then if you notice, the clutch is directly below the engine, the crankshaft. And that is because even though it's not modeled in there, if I were to try to swing this thing in either direction to try to change the shape or where it is, I would always run into the same problem, that because of the angle of these cylinders like this, the chain would want to rub into this case. I'm designing this so these top ends, you can get these for as cheap as 35, 40 bucks on Alibaba with the piston included. I don't want there to be any modifications besides, if you want, you cut these arms off and it cleans up the shape. And I bought this one for very cheap because those arms actually broke off. You can see it immediately changes the shape. But otherwise, no modifications. Especially not here, because oil is inside here. I don't want people to have any leaks, or let's just keep it simple. Those are the rules I came up with. I like those rules. No modifications to this. So okay, so this is in an odd position and it's not enough gear reduction. So with all that pressure, I didn't want to. Always want to keep it simple and cheap. But besides a primary drive, now we have a secondary drive. It just solves all these issues. All of a sudden, it puts this output shaft where we want it to be. Like right where we want it to be. I like it. It changes the shape of this engine case to something more desirable and nice to look at, and it puts this in the right place. If we had it over here, the chain going to the rear wheel would be excessively long and you would run into reliability issues due to that. So this is the ideal location. It's familiar, we're used to it, it works. And then you may say, okay, why not just have one speed? Well, if you're already going to this amount of complexity of having 2 levels of reduction, you already put this whole engine into a pretty expensive class. It's already going to be a very niche hobby, so we're not making huge numbers of these things every year. All the parts are going to be made in small batch. It's already pretty complex just having one level and two levels of reduction and a manual clutch. So at that point, it's really a small percentage of the overall cost to add an extra speed. And really, I don't know if I'm going to be excited about this if we don't do 2 speeds. Maybe down the future somebody can talk to me and talk me into a single speed. But I'm way into this 2 speed. I also put a lot of hours into designing the shift mechanism so that it doesn't use any splines or internal keyways, because I want this thing to be cheap to make in small batches, and so people can fix them. You know, I like this channel, Louis Rothman, where he's always talking about designed obsolescence and how these companies are always designing everything to break, and so that you can't fix it, you need them, and really they just want you to buy another one. I want this whole engine to be the opposite. I want it so that if you have the most basic machining equipment, or you have a friend, you could fix any part, you can replicate any part, including the crankshaft, the connecting rods, everything. And I'm serious, I think after so many are sold, or so many years, I'll release all the 3D models so that for multi-generation these things can be maintained and kept online. Because like I said, even the crankshaft, the crankcase, keep it all simple. So the V-twin, I think we went over why it's more vibration resistant. It can balance better. We did. The form factor, the weight, the 2-speed, I mean, you really want it's self-explanatory. You know you want 2 speeds. Let me try to remember, what were people's argument against it? I should use an RC automatic. Yes, good idea. But no, because the implication would be that I would need to run a pull start, and I don't want this to be any wider. I mean, even this, I had this engine cheating because it doesn't even have a pull starter on it. So you add a pull starter and it's a lot. I mean, then even not including the shaft, it's as wide as this or more. I don't like pull starters. I mean, I used it, it was kind of cool, but I want a manual clutch. I want what I want. I want a 2-speed. We're gonna have 3 bearings on the crank, extra stable crank. And the original, so when you get a Gx50, it's gonna come with the ignition. We're gonna make it so you keep using all those parts. One of the flywheels, you'll have a spare flywheel. And another a big thing with this engine, so our 2-strokes, they're cool and all, but they don't have that much utility, honestly. They're not that useful. I posted some pictures on online, but these engines, I mean, you could really use them for lawn and garden. I mean, you can see these are hard-working engines. Portable generators, all sorts of use. So I picture one day, you know, people will have these, and then they'll have a portable generator, and they'll have a weed whacker that also has, you know, chainsaw attachments. Basically, they'll have 4 engines, and if ever needed, you know, they can keep these things running forever. Just start cannibalizing some of their lawn and garden equipment. And all the spare parts are extremely cheap, very available. The more I look into these engines, the more I'm into them. They're just too cool. What else? I think that's it. I think that's everything. I have some parts I gotta quote. It's really late. I'm getting kind of like loopy. But yeah, stay tuned. More videos coming. Also, I did see somebody complaining about me trying to speed up the videos. I was copying another YouTube channel. Maybe I'll repost that video of me taking apart the engine without speeding it up. Thanks for the input. Yeah, please guys keep giving me the input. Yeah, it's late. But yeah, okay, website, rdmanu.com. Like this video, subscribe, share it. Share it to other Facebook groups, share it to your friends. We want people to pay attention to this because at some point, I'm gonna open up pre-sales. Maybe very soon. And the more people that pre-sale, the faster things happen. If I get almost no pre-sales, I'll have to take on more of these jobs. I'll have to aggressively do it. And I like helping people and all. But come on now, let's get these going. You at least want to see this. But imagine like being in second gear, lower RPM cruising 35 miles an hour down the street and just like whisper. But then you drop down to first and you just rev your way up. Takes off. Back to second. This little piston screaming. Then it's a Sunday, clean your bike, adjusting your valves, checking your belt, and you start it up, you got a little belt line. You got oil change for once, that's cool. You got your spark plug diagonal like that, that's cool. All sorts of hoses and oil catch cans. You can check inside an oil catch can, see what you got. All these contours, letting people know you got a belt. All that is just so cool. It's on your bicycle. I mean, people pay $7,000-8,000 for these carbon bicycles, and they don't even have a V-twin. People say these are expensive. I'm like, but it's a V-twin. It's a 2-speed. Get your whole bicycle weighing 70 pounds with a V-twin on it. It's gonna get some attention. And you see the way I'm designing this, I mean, any part on here can be made at home. I mean, you need the part with basic equipment. Like a milling machine like this, and a manual lathe. You don't need a lathe like this, but this is my manual lathe. Some basic chuck. This is a big guy. Just some basic tooling. Anyways, later guys, it's very late. I'm going to have to route these giant pipes, which I mean, they're awesome, but for a motorized bike, they kind of get in the way and they're not quiet. I mean, like, no matter what you do, they're not quiet. This like, I repacked it doesn't do anything, almost anything at all. It's nearly useless. That's because it barks out at both ends. That's a big, I mean, there's no way to stop the sound when the whole openings and exits are that big. These little guys, these might whisper. See, on Facebook, I posted some videos for my YouTube crowd. That's the group. Please join. right. See, that's what I'm talking about. I posted. I have no idea who this guy is, but I like his channel. I just watched a bunch of his videos. He has that 35 running pretty sweet. I love that he has his dog on the trailer. It's funny. Alright, later guys. I'll keep them coming, but 1:48, it's late. Hopefully we covered what I wanted to cover. Aren't these cool though? These are just... Obviously this is happening too. I mean, I have 4 of these things sitting here. Oh, these guys, that's the 50. That was good. These guys, this 35 they sold me as a 50. We basically split the order down the middle and they gave me a partial refund. I'm keeping the stuff though. And they did, yeah, I mean, they were just like, hey man, I'm trying to raise a family kind of thing. Like, they basically admitted they lied to me, but without saying it, I guess because of Amazon. I'm cool with it. I'm not trying to mess up anybody's day, but I mean, I guess I'm a little bit torn on it. Maybe I almost like should say something. They're selling Gx50s that are actually Gx35s. They are higher quality and they do have like a nice iron bore, which isn't necessarily required with the GX. But they probably don't have the capacity or capabilities to do this like high-tech silicone enrichment on the cylinder bores like Honda does. So that's probably why they kind of have to in China go to the steel bore. Because this sleeve, this unplated bore, that's an authentic Honda. And apparently these last. That's a thing. Yes, there's no plating in there. That's raw aluminum. And apparently the piston has a high-tech coating too. You can see it's a weird color piston. I can see China saying, okay, yeah, it costs more to put this iron sleeve in, but it uses basic technologies that we have ready to go, and we don't have to figure out Honda's crazy coating system or silicone enrichment on the cylinder bore. We can make them. So that's what I'm thinking, but it's not a Gx50. They did put like probably a Gx50 carb on it. Anyways, that's resolved. We're all getting loose keys now. Let me see. Where's the cold start? Gotta treat this engine with more respect. It's the good one. Here it is. Luski, I don't know however you want to say that. We can trust this brand. They won't do you wrong. We don't need the starters, but so yeah, also you'll have parts to resell. We're only using about 2/3 of the engine. Later guys, I'm waiting to them. I might just make one and make it so you could pay into the pre-sale to, yeah. I need to wake up and talk about that another day. Enjoy.